My friends, let us come together for a few moments in a spirit of deep quietude, for the truth we seek cannot be found in the noise of human thought, nor in the restless activity of the mind that is forever attempting to grasp, to acquire, to understand. The spiritual life begins when we discover that God is not something to be reached through effort, nor a presence we must draw toward ourselves through prayer or ritual. God is already the very life of our being, already the ground upon which we stand, already the consciousness by which we awaken each morning and by which we rest each night. And so, before we go further, let us set aside the notion that we are here to acquire something or to gain spiritual attainment. We are here only to recognize that which has forever been true. The silence into which we enter is not a method nor a practice to achieve a goal, but a resting in the awareness that the infinite is already functioning as our very self. As we sit in this inner stillness, we are not trying to summon God, nor persuade God, nor reach upward toward God. We are simply withdrawing attention from the distractions of the outer world so that the presence, which is always at the center of our being, may reveal itself. In this recognition, we begin to feel a gentle loosening of the tensions of mind, a soft falling away of the sense of personal responsibility to make something happen, and a quiet realization that the spiritual life is not something we create, but something we allow to unfold as we proceed. Remember this: the kingdom is not attained by striving, but by becoming still, not by the power of thought, but by the silence in which thought ceases to dominate. In that sacred silence, God reveals God, and that is the purpose of our time together. As we move more deeply into this message, it is essential that we establish the foundation upon which all true spiritual realization rests. That God is not a distant being, nor an external power, nor an influence that must be invited into our experience. God is the very consciousness with which you are now hearing these words. This is the first great revelation that comes to the seeker when he stops seeking and becomes still enough to feel the truth rather than think it. The moment you recognize that the life you call I is not a private personal life, but the activity of the infinite, expressing itself as your individual being, the entire nature of your spiritual journey changes. No longer is God something to reach, to acquire, or to persuade. The presence is already here, already functioning as your awareness, your breath, your capacity to perceive, to love, to be. The sense of separation that has haunted humanity for centuries is nothing more than a mental illusion, something believed, not something real. And so long as we believe ourselves to be a self apart from God, a self that must call out to God for help or supply or healing, we remain trapped in the false premise that the divine is somewhere outside the circumference of our own being. In truth, the fullness of God is embodied in every moment of conscious awareness you have ever known. Even your longing for God is not your longing, it is God's own impulse within you, drawing you back to the recognition of what you have always been. When you understand this, even faintly, you begin to lay down the heavy burden of trying to become spiritual, trying to reach enlightenment, trying to attain something higher. You see instead that the spiritual life is a revelation, not a creation, and the revelation begins the moment you realize that God is not something added to you, but the very substance, the very essence, the very consciousness that you have mistakenly believed to be your own. This realization is the doorway into Christ consciousness, and it is already open within you, Now, as we move further along this path of inner unfoldment, it becomes necessary to understand the nature of true spiritual contemplation. And here we must set aside many notions that the world has accepted concerning prayer, meditation, and communion with God. Most forms of prayer, as humanity understands them, are attempts to reach out toward a power believed to be separate from oneself. They are filled with words, desires, supplications, affirmations, or mental imagery, all efforts of the mind to make something happen or to bring something about. But the spiritual life is not lived through the mind's activity, it is lived through the spirit's activity, and the spirit requires no words, no mental effort, no direction from us. True contemplation, as I use the word, is a state in which we cease speaking to God and begin listening for God. In this listening, we are not expecting a voice, not anticipating a message, not waiting for some dramatic experience. We are simply resting in the awareness that there is an infinite presence, an infinite intelligence, and it is here where we are. It is this inner stillness that opens the way for the impartation of truth. When the mind is quiet, when the personal sense of I want, I need, or I must have, is silent, then the divine activity begins to flow into consciousness. We become aware, not through thought, but through a gentle spiritual impression of the presence that is always functioning at the center of our being. In this state of listening, we are no longer creators of prayers. We are beholders of God's grace. And this beholding is the essence of Christ consciousness. It is the recognition that the Father's presence, the divine presence, is already here, speaking itself, revealing itself, making itself known, not through effort, but through silence. Therefore, let us understand that every moment we spend in quiet listening is a moment spent in the awareness of God, and that it is in the silence, not in the words, where the true communion takes place. Before we can enter the silence in which the presence reveals itself, there must come a quiet, humble willingness to set aside the personal sense of self that has, for so long, attempted to run our lives. This personal I, the human ego, is forever striving, forever fearing, forever planning, forever reaching for something it imagines to be missing. It is this restless selfhood that prevents us from hearing the still small voice, not because God hides himself, but because the noise of personal will leaves no space for the divine impartation to be felt. And so, the preparation for true spiritual communion is not the sharpening of the mind or the strengthening of effort. It is precisely the opposite. It is the gentle surrender of the belief that we know what is needed, that we can direct spiritual power, or that we must control the course of our experience. As long as we approach God with a desire to get something, a healing, a supply, is a solution, we remain in the realm of the personal mind, where true communion cannot take place. Therefore, the first movement of the soul in preparation for silence is the laying down of all self-initiated purpose. We become as an empty vessel, not in despair, but in receptivity. We relinquish the impulse to guide the meditation, to force an experience, or to condition the presence by our expectations. This emptying is not a dramatic act. It is a quiet recognition that the human self can do nothing of a spiritual nature and need not try. When we adopt this attitude, Father, I do not know, Reveal thyself. We step out of the way and make room for the true activity of God. It is in this emptiness, this freedom from personal will, that the door opens inwardly and the grace of God finds an unobstructed channel through which it may express. This surrender is not loss, it is liberation. For when the personal sense falls silent, the divine life that has always been our life rises into awareness, and we discover that nothing was ever required of us but the willingness to be still. And now, having prepared ourselves through the gentle release of personal will, we come to that sacred moment in which we enter the silence, not as seekers, not as beggars, not as individuals striving to attain spiritual experience, but as the very place where God's presence may reveal itself. You will discover, as you continue on this path, that the deepest spiritual practice is beautifully simple. It asks nothing of you except that you rest quietly in the awareness that the infinite is already here. And so, as you sit in stillness, there is no need to shape your thoughts, no need to repeat holy words, no need to engage in affirmation or denial. Those are activities of the mind, and the mind has no part in the revelation of spirit. Instead, let there be a moment of gentle recognition, perhaps only a whisper within your heart of the truth. Here I am, Father, speak, for thy servant heareth. This is not a phrase to repeat. It is not a mantra. It is a momentary turning, an inward remembrance that there is a presence, a love, an intelligence functioning at the center of your being. After this recognition, release even the words. Allow them to dissolve into silence. The practice now becomes pure receptivity. You are not waiting for an experience. You are not hoping for a sign. You are simply being still, inwardly open, inwardly listening, without expectation. A soft, inner quietness begins to form, a quietness not created by you, but arising of its own accord. The moment you stop leaning upon thought, in that stillness you may sense an unspoken assurance, a peace that is not dependent on conditions, a presence that cannot be named yet is unmistakably real. But even these are not sought. They are simply noticed. If they come, and if nothing comes, that too is perfect. For the value of this silence is not in what you feel, but in the fact that you have withdrawn from the mental noise long enough for God to be God in you without interference. This is the beginning of true spiritual communion. This is the doorway to Christ consciousness, and it is found only in the silence that contains no request, no argument, no effort, only the quiet recognition of omnipresence. As we rest in this holy silence, something begins to take place within us, something not of our doing, not of our planning, and not the result of any mental activity we could initiate. It is a spiritual activity, invisible to sense, yet unmistakably real. Goldsmith called this the impartation, the moment in which the infinite invisible announces itself within your consciousness. But let us be clear, this impartation does not come as a voice, nor as a vision, nor as an emotional surge. It comes as a stillness deeper than silence, a quiet assurance that needs no explanation. In this sacred inner atmosphere, you may discover that the fear which a moment ago seemed so real has dissolved without struggle. Tension that once gripped the mind loosens, not because you worked at it, but because fear and tension cannot exist in the presence of realized truth. You may feel a sense of being upheld, supported, even carried not by effort, but by the recognition of a presence greater than your human sense of life. This is the dawning of Christ consciousness, a subtle yet profound shift in which you know, without any reasoning, that the life you are living is not your own. It is the life of God, living itself as you. Nothing dramatic may occur outwardly, yet inwardly something has changed. You find yourself less reactive, less fearful, less dependent upon circumstances. The peace that arises is not a peace you created, it is the peace that passeth understanding, the peace that comes only when the personal sense of self has been set aside long enough for the divine self to make itself known. Often this impartation lasts only a moment, maybe even less than a moment, but in that moment, eternity touches you. And though the mind may rush in afterward with its concerns and questions, something within you has been transformed. You have felt, however faintly, the activity of God within your own consciousness, and this is the beginning of healing, the beginning of transformation, the beginning of a new way of being rooted, not in effort, but in revelation. Nothing more is required of you than to be receptive, to remain available, and to trust that grace knows its own way and its own timing. For Christ consciousness is never attained, it is revealed, and it reveals itself in those silent moments when the human mind yields to the presence that has been there all along. As we continue to rest in this inner stillness, you will begin to notice something quite remarkable. Problems that once held your attention, that seemed urgent, threatening, or insurmountable, begin to soften, lose their intensity, and in many cases dissolve altogether. And this occurs not because you have applied spiritual power to them, not because you have affirmed their unreality, nor because you have demanded a particular outcome. No, this transformation happens precisely because you have not brought the problem into your meditation. You have brought only your awareness of God in the presence of realized truth. The false sense drops away like a shadow before light. Let us understand a profound principle. A problem, in whatever form it appears, is never an entity in itself. It is only the mental picture formed when we view life from a sense of separation. When the mind is filled with fear, the picture is one of danger. When the mind is filled with lack, the picture is one of limitation. When the mind is filled with a sense of personal responsibility, the picture is one of burdens. But these pictures have no power of their own. They are projections of the mind. And so, the moment we stop trying to fix the picture, stop wrestling with conditions, stop treating effects, we create an opening through which the presence may reveal what has been true all along, that nothing stands apart from God, and therefore nothing has power to oppose the activity of God. In that light, discord dissolves, not because God intervenes, but because the illusion is seen for what it is. Disease yields, not because a human healer has done something, but because the presence is realized as the only life. Lack disappears, not through positive thinking, but through the recognition that omnipresence leaves no space for absence. Harmony is restored, not by manipulating circumstances, but by allowing the divine order to appear where human will has stepped aside. This is why Goldsmith could say that we do not treat conditions, we behold God. The silent practice does not address the problem. It dissolves the false sense that created the problem. In this way, the outer experience changes as a natural consequence of an inner revelation. And so we learn that healing is not an act we perform, nor a result we produce. It is the fruit of realized oneness. It is the evidence that we have touched the presence that is forever whole. Now, it is not enough that we touch this inner presence only in moments of meditation or periods of quiet contemplation. If spiritual living is to become our way of life, this awareness must flow with us into the marketplace, into the home, into our activities, our relationships, and even into the ordinary tasks that fill each day. The purpose of the silence is not to withdraw from life, but to reveal the presence that lives us, guides us, and sustains us in every circumstance. When you rise from meditation, do not leave the atmosphere of stillness behind. Carry it with you as a gentle awareness that there is an invisible something walking with you, going before you, preparing the way. You will discover that your speech becomes quieter, your reaction slower, your judgment softer, because you are no longer meeting the world as a personal self, but as a transparency for the divine. When a challenge presents itself, a moment of irritation, a decision to be made, a difficulty that arises, pause inwardly, not to think, not to analyze, but to rest for a breath in the remembrance of mine own self. I can do nothing. The Father within me doeth the work. This pause, even if only for a second, restores you to the consciousness of oneness. It lifts you out of personal responsibility and returns you to the awareness that the same presence which spoke in the silence is here, now, in this very moment. When you touch this inner space before acting, you will find that action flows harmoniously. If there is something to say, the words are given. If there is something to do, the intuition arises gently, without strain. And if silence is required, you will feel it as naturally as a leaf turning toward the sun. Over time, this becomes not a practice, but a state of being. You come to realize that the presence that met you in your meditation is never absent. It walks through the day as your clarity, your love, your patience, your wisdom. It gradually becomes clear that there is no moment in which you live alone. The invisible Christ goes before you, stands behind you, and moves within you. This is spiritual living, not the attempt to remember God as a discipline, but the recognition that God is remembering you, carrying you, and expressing as you. When this awareness becomes the background of your life, even the simplest activities are transformed. The ordinary becomes sacred, the mundane becomes illumined, and every step you take is taken in the quiet assurance that you are never separate from the one who is your life. And now, as we bring this period of sharing to a close, let us once more return to that sacred stillness in which all true revelation takes place. For everything that has been spoken here is but a pointer, a gentle reminder to turn inward, where the real teacher abides. Words may inspire, concepts may uplift, but it is only the realized presence that transforms. And that presence is not far off. It is closer than breath, nearer than thought, hidden in the quiet depths of your own being. As we rest together in this moment, let us acknowledge, without effort and without strain, the simple truth: God is here, the invisible, the infinite, the very life that animates us, is present now, complete and whole. Nothing needs to be added. Nothing needs to be corrected. Nothing needs to be improved. The kingdom we seek is already established within us, and so we do not leave this gathering in search of spirit, nor do we depart with tasks to accomplish or practices to perfect. We leave only with a gentle awareness that wherever we go, the presence goes with us, for it is our being. As this recognition deepens into conviction, You will find that life unfolds more harmoniously, not because you have made it so, but because you are no longer living as a separate self. You are living as a witness to the activity of God. And in that witnessing, every moment becomes a benediction. May the peace that is not of this world abide with you. May the light that cannot be extinguished illumine your path. And may the presence that has revealed itself in the silence continue to unfold its grace within you, guiding, sustaining, and fulfilling every step of your journey. We part outwardly, but inwardly we remain united in the one life, the one consciousness, the one Christ that is the truth of all being.